Okay, so hi everybody. I'm Lisa, the director of the Harley Gallery, and thanks for joining us for our first virtual gallery talk, which we are recording. I'm going to turn the discussion over to Jo and David in a moment, but first of all, I just want to talk a bit about Jo's exhibition Between Islands, which came about when she was the joint winner of the Harley Open in 2019. And she gave us this tiny painting of a tent in a mysterious landscape, which somehow just chimed with my experience of Welbeck, where we're based, which is a 17th century ducal estate at the northern end of Sherwood Forest. And we started speaking about a solo show. Jo was offered the opportunity to explore some of the private areas of the estate, and through what she called yesterday incidental encounters with those landscapes and also the historic art here, she created the paintings, the drawings and ceramics in the exhibition. So Jo and David are going to talk for about 20 minutes about the works in the exhibition, and they'll then have about 10 minutes to answer any questions you may have. And you can send them to me through the chat function on the toolbar at the bottom of your screen.
That's on mute now.
No, you can speak now.
Hi Hannah, we can hear you.
Right.
Can you turn the volume?
Where's
Yeah.
the volume?
So I hope that you all enjoy the next half hour or so, and obviously there could be technical glitches and interruptions, so please bear with us. Now, can everyone that isn't Jo or David mute your mics? And thanks, Jo and David, over to you two.
Hi Lisa, thank you. I'll just say a bit that, you know, being approached to do this exhibition was really intriguing, and it was because of the Portland collection, because of the estate, because of the paintings and the ceramics as well, the collection of ceramics. It was just really exciting, but such a huge project. And I was thinking about the collaboration with David and why that came about. And that was because the kind of immensity of the site and what I wanted to do to create a collection that responded to a collection and to a landscape and to a world. I wanted to create my own collection to then be presented really by someone else. I'll let David introduce himself in a moment, but he's had a lot of experience of working with collections. So it was really great to have him on the project. And also he had framed my work in the past. And framing is a big issue for me because I'm creating worlds, and then a frame usually kind of arrests those worlds. So we'll talk a bit about the framing and how, you know, David came up with this and how it really worked for me and how it affects the exhibition. The other thing I'll briefly introduce here as well is the idea of this world called Dovia, which was a place I invented really at a period when I'd given up painting and I needed to keep creating. It's an anagram of a void, kind of in a void when you're not painting if you're a painter. And then I invented these series of islands in this mythology and diaries, drawings, maps. So it was a way to stay creative. And then, you know, combining with the Harley here and, you know, that history, this idea of creating worlds, because I'm thinking of Margaret Cavendish, Duchess of Newcastle, wrote the first, well, I think the first science fiction novel where she created this place called the Blazing World with loads of different mythologies and talking to animals. So she invented a world. So everything with the site and its history seemed really perfect for everything I was doing at the time. So with that introduction in place, I'm going to let you, David, explain his role as well and who he is.
Yeah. Well, Jo and I actually met when Jo was installing a group show. So we'd already had a collaboration of sorts, arranging and displaying works. So that was the first encounter. And then as we got to know each other a bit more, and there was a bit more trust, I asked if I could frame one of Jo's work, because like she said, they are worlds within themselves, and they are so detailed and perfect in their own right that framing those paintings like that is really difficult. So I kind of wanted the challenge of and offered to frame one of her works. So that led on to the discussions around the Harley Gallery and her project. But I personally, as well as an artist, I also work as a technician and art handler. So I've got lots of experience working at galleries all over the UK, spending most of my time at the National Gallery. So I brought that to the collaboration as well. So and then Joe and I took a visit to the Welbeck estate together. And I was lucky enough to join Joe and having that privileged access, that kind of second stage behind what the general public normally get to see when they visit such a place. So that was really great, and we went on a kind of felt a bit like Jurassic Park. We were in a safari. We were in a car being driven around different areas. It was quite an incredible landscape, really. I don't know if we talk about that.
It's the concealment, David. We talk so much. So I've got this slide of the gates, an old postcard. Because you have so many things intermingling. It's a private estate, so there's so many areas not accessible to the public. But then you have tours of the Abbey once a year, and then there's the Portland collection where things come in and out of the collection, move in and out. So there's this constant flexible space where you're thinking things are hidden. Perfect example of this are the tunnels, which again aren't accessible to the public. So we were really lucky to get into, be able to see them. And that's the fifth Duke of Portland, the Welbeck estate, built a load of tunnels radiating from the actual Abbey, underground tunnels. They're fascinating. This one is a Pulhamite tunnel, which was a really early form of cement, which is molded. I'll show you the next slide. So if you can see, there's Rose Soleil, which the Cavendishes used as one of their emblems. So that really fed into the work, David, didn't it? This kind of concealment, but also the rocks, the idea of rock, but made up rock. So there's a kind of surrealist notion around that, creating rock. And at the bottom left there's a piece of rock that I made from ceramic, and all of those pieces are made from ceramic to mimic rock. And rock became a real thing in the exhibition, but it was ceramic rock. So there's a kind of double artifice there. And the caves nearby, Cresswell Crags, really visit if you can. They're prehistoric caves. There's lots of witch marks in them. So these caves and these rocks are really a big part of the exhibition.
I was just thinking about when you first start exploring such a project and such a vast collection and history, the type of painting and the kind of subject matter that you were working with, you have to be drawn to certain things to really kind of latch onto, because it can be, I think even in our discussions online, we discussed how you need to focus. You can't be seduced by everything because it'd just be too much. So that cave was a really good, solid thing to latch onto, especially that, like you described, the way that there's a kind of artifice about it, a surrealism about it. And also they're just so mad, like miles of these tunnels. And then again, talking about the surface of these tunnels and how they were sculpted, and then the manufacturing of the stone, and then again painting fabric and fabric appearing solid and lightweight. There's all sorts of play on textures once you looked at those caves.
Definitely within the exhibition, things are soft and fluid and hard and stone-like, but the stone isn't really stone. This is another tunnel, so that much more formal. This is the South Tunnel, and this one is this particular gateway is accessible on Robin Hood Way. So that's a really nice walk if you get the chance. But again, completely closed. The tunnel's derelict. There's someone that lives in part of the housing next to it, but it's a derelict closed tunnel. So again, it's a concealment. But that there's nothing more appealing than a barred entry, especially for an artist. So this is another kind of example of how things develop. This is Mary Medici. This is once Queen of France. This portrait was in the is in Welbeck Abbey, which I saw on the tour. But, you know, it's a brief tour, it's a brief glimpse. And from that, I started to create these artifacts from Dovia. And this is just one moment, this glimpse that Lisa was talking about earlier, where you kind of think, I was so intrigued by her rosette, and whether it was mourning, whether it's something, I kind of researched into it, and it was worn quite a lot, but the history was quite hard to penetrate on that kind of visual imagery. But I think we spoke that, you know, in a way, it's that surface, and you dip in and out, and from that you kind of unravel these worlds, you unravel a new world. And I think, you know, knowing too much about the history, and because it's kind of such an immense historical site and landscape, if you know too much, it's almost kind of numbs you, and you follow this path down to historical revelation, and then you kind of almost end up making illustration. And I think the way of just having these brief touches, you know, so from this I made this sorrowing purse, which is an artifact which would be used for mourning, which would have a black pearl in it. The pearl comes in later. These knots, I learned how to do all these knots, and they're kind of grief knots called nulments. So that whole kind of mythology evolved from this one image. And there were so many moments of that within the exhibition and the production of the work.
Yeah, it's like you're saying, having all the answers to the questions that you might have been asking, it leaves little space for you to kind of interpret. And I was just wondering, like, that balance between kind of being able to draw upon the total, the kind of world of Dovia must be so helpful when navigating the history of the Welbeck estate. You know, being able to dip into and just create the answer for yourself. And it's not a get out, it's amazing. It's a perfect opportunity to explore materials and ideas and things like that. But a number of, they're quite melancholy, aren't they? You kind of turn to the dark, which is, you know, I mean, it's not a bright picture, let's be honest, but it's
it's not a jolly picture of jolly portrait. And, you know, she was, you know, once the queen, she did loads of political meddling, was exiled, died of pleurisy and destitution, do you know? So there's a whole kind of mourning in the very image itself. But that was something I didn't find out till later, you know. It's something, and if I knew that, that would have a different effect. So it's these dipping layers of knowledge. And I really like what you're saying about, I can provide the answers. And I think that's really nice in this exhibition and how it's been made, because my paintings are usually very subtle and implied. There's an implied narrative, but there isn't a narrative. And this was so lovely that I could literally make things up. And the more I made up, the more it evolved and became real, actually, through the creation of the collection.
Also, it's quite good to hear the chronology of your knowledge as well, like that timeline, where you filled in some blanks and then later on actually discovered the truth of a character or of a detail. And then, you know, you were kind of, the imagination was kind of, your hunch or your imagination was kind of correct in some way.
Yeah. And I think you get that from our art anyway, don't you? You feel things, you don't need to be told things. And I think that's nice. You feel that resonance, and viewing art, you make up your own narratives with the information you have. So fabric was a really big part of the work. And obviously fabric, if you know my work, I often do paintings of fabric structures. So that's a part of my work. And I was thinking why it is such, and I was thinking many years ago when I was reading Gaston Bachelard, Poetics of Reverie, and there was this idea that sleeping in your bed sheets and your nightmares and these creases, it was this lovely line, contained all the weight of badly led lives. And it's this idea that fabric folds hold history, hold things, but yet they're so fragile and movable. And I love that they're static in the paintings. So David and I met with Hannah Marples, who's a fabric expert, historical fabric expert at the Harley. And she took us through the collection of paintings and explained different fabrics, explained meanings. You know, you've got cloth of silver, you have silk taffeta that's slashed to reveal rich linen, these frills and fancies, the more frills and fancies and silly bits of superfluous ribbon show how important you are. So that really fed into it, especially the idea of the slashed sleeve, again, concealing something underneath and something glimpsed and revealed. So that came into the painting. That's one of my favourite paintings in the exhibition. And again, invented. You can see touches of the fabric from the collection, and it's kind of frilliness, but then, you know, having the Jo Whittle treatment of decaying and being moss covered, which again really reflects the estate. The framework in the background was actually from a photograph of a fireplace near the Rosary ruins on the site. So I turned that into a framework, and these concealed ideas. I'm really interested in frames, again with my fairground paintings, frames being covered, grown over, concealed. And when we met Derek, who has been on the estate for a long time, just knows everything about the history of the estate. You know, he said, you know, Welbeck's like a palimpsest. I can't say it. And it's just layers of history. Thank you, David. Layers of history that emerge and re-emerging or are concealed. So it's almost, you know, he talked about it pulling itself around itself, but yet history's there. And I think that's fascinating. It's not a, you know, we're celebrating this history and showing off, and there's loads of gold. You know, it's this beautiful, emerging, fragile history, which I think is beautiful. It goes with my paintings. You know, another element which chimes with the work. Kind of like a perfect storm, but in a good way. You know, the whole thing, really.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know, Jo, that was a fireplace, a detail from a fireplace until we talked recently. And I just think that's a really good example of drawing upon these little motifs around the estate. And we talk a bit more about that in a minute with the hovering ball and stuff. But
Yeah.
they're just motifs that ordinarily aren't that interesting, but probably, you know, you know, on the surface. But again, there's so much history behind everything.
There's so much appeal to the ruin. You know, my paintings are about ruins, and there's so much appeal to create this ruin. Or just, it's such a beautiful, the fireplace is such a beautiful thing to paint itself, but it comes through this reinterpretation and this kind of going through my consciousness and coming out the other end, and all these strands pulling together and coming out the other side. So a new ruin is invented, but still has those essences.
They're quite theatrical ruins, aren't they? I mean,
Yeah.
That image itself there's some real theatre and drama about it. So again, that's something. I don't know. Was it already there? How much have you added that in? That sense of drama or melancholy.
And I think it's already there with my work, but I think we spoke a lot about this behind the scenes, you know, and facades, which feature in my work anyway. So you're looking behind, like, and imagining behind. And I think we spoke a lot about this being affected in lockdown. You know, we had that moment, we had that visit just before everything started unraveling. So everything was done at a distance. And the more I couldn't access the estate, the more it unraveled and became this theatre, but a theatre that you could only go so far into, and things were behind, and you could just imagine that. I think we spoke a lot about that at the time. So yeah, this is the fabrics. I'm just showing a side-on image because it kind of shows the kind of profile. This square frame with you know, the painting sitting within it was something David did when he first framed my work. And I've kind of really felt that for once there wasn't a formalizing frame that was just butted against the painting, and all the painting's framed now, that's done. It seemed to bring in elements. The first one you did was grey felt with a concrete building unpainted, and it just echoed so perfectly. And I think that carried on through here. So I'm just showing you this little lip of fabric, which I wanted to bring that in, that the kind of ruchiness. And it's William Cavendish's scarf here. And when we were talking to Hannah Marples, she said it looks like shot silk, silk dupion, which is two-tone fabric that glistens and gleams in the light depending on where it strikes. It's got a warp and a weft of different silks. But actually in this particular painting, it's where the painting is faded. So it would have just been a red scarf that's made up of different colours and it faded, but to look like shot silk. And I just loved that it looked like something much more profound and beautiful than it actually was in the original painting. And again, that kind of unraveled for us, didn't it? But yeah, talk about the framing maybe, David, because that's such a big element.
Yeah, well, initially when I framed something with grey felt, a painting that you'd done a few years earlier, it was purely an experiment, really, a challenge to see if I could create something that did justice, a way of framing your work that did justice. Like I said before, they're so detailed and perfect in their own right, and I thought that it succeeded in framing the work, but there were still questions around, like why was it necessary? But I think as soon as we started talking about your work with the Portland collection, and we walked around the collection with Hannah, and she talked about the fabrics, it became once the idea kind of settled in, as more of your paintings were going to be taking on these, as you were going to be displaying more paintings, that it felt as though this kind of collective, the kind of collective nature of these frames would work a bit more. And the image that Joe's got up now is was probably the most successful, I'd say, of the works, mainly because in the Portland collection, an area of display had really caught my eye, and it was some paintings and some sculptural things, and the wall was actually a curtain, so the paintings were hovering on the curtain. And being a technician, I got a bit nerdy and thought, well, behind each fold of that fabric there must be a structural support of some kind. So there was a kind of I really liked that detail. So when it came to mounting this painting on copper plate, I think it was important to kind of reference the kind of magic of it being suspended. And I think during the conversations Joe and I were having during lockdown, she kept calling it sorcery. So there was a kind of magic, a sense of magic to this copper plate just floating on the surface of this black velvet. Is it, Joe? Is it?
Yeah, velvet, and it was that magical thing. And there's a really velvety surface to the painting itself, and they're just very hard to photograph, but it kind of gleams in the exhibition. It's an amazing piece, and we put that little bit of copper fabric in as well. And it was amazing. Again, this was just at the end of lockdown, so I'd stand in David's back garden with a piece of art, and he'd go upstairs and he'd come back down, and it's like magic tricks every time he came out of his back door. It's very exciting.
Yeah.
This is David's piece. I'll let you quickly talk about this. I think we have to go a bit quicker, David, because I've really been waffling. But
Yeah, no, it's cool. So my work, I work predominantly with collage and some photography. So this was a good opportunity to kind of combine the two mediums. So I thought this would be an interesting kind of counterpiece to Joe's work, just through use of materials and stuff. But I displayed them as kind of leaves of a catalogue or maybe an album. And the images in the photographs are just fragments of or souvenirs from a imagined place, drawing upon both Joe's Dovia and Margaret Cavendish's The Blazing World. And I think, and I've got to remember the title properly now because I haven't written it down, but I think one work on the left is 8 marvels from the interstitial passageways, and I think the other work is just 9 marvels, but they're effectively souvenirs from an imagined world that are kind of imponderable and laid out in a kind of museum archive, really.
So we'll quickly talk about the hang. That's really important. Well, it's not really a hang. I think the whole point was that I could allow David to curate it as a collection. So we had some discussions about using, the kind of gold felt, because that was reflected in a portrait in the Portland collection, and all the other things in the plinths. But really, because we couldn't work together, it happened on the day we turned up at the Harley, and I said to David, you know, I gave them the objects, I explained what they are, like the 3 objects in the front are pap boats. I explained them, hopefully we'll get to them. Explained the logic of every object and thing, and he said, oh right, so this should have a hierarchy, this should be more important than this in a collection. So he displayed it as a collection. I really had not anything to do with it because it was about me giving it over to David. Yeah, I picked colours for the walls and things, but mostly I didn't want to be involved in it, because in order for it to become a real collection, it had to be, the author would not have been there, because it's an assemblage of different objects and things.
Yeah, so like Joe said, yeah, she kind of left me to it, and I had to ask Joe, almost like I was referring to some, I don't know, some sage about, or expert on a collection. But I was kind of what I described as a conduit between Joe and the viewer, in that I needed to create some sort of, or translate and create some sort of order to this this collection.
Chaos.
So, yeah, chaos. Yeah. There were works that didn't go in because Joe made a lot of work, and I think it was just about kind of displaying the collection succinctly, really. And I had an insight into the reasoning behind items, so I was able to interpret them, you know, accordingly. So I really enjoyed it, because the seduction and order of things is my cup of tea, really.
Yeah, I think it's that authentic thing, you know, the authentic collection. These are pap boats, which I made from this original gold boat in the collection, and they're used to feed babies. And I made a whole mythology about them, again with the knotting. That one's a soaring one because it has the knots. There's a Pulhamite one, gold, the idea of hidden gold. Certain parts of the history, many of the objects in the Portland collection were hidden and buried in terms of conflict, and came out of the ground again. So I would make a ceramic object, I would cover it in gold leaf, and then I'd cover it in a black paint to disguise its wealth and beauty, you know, to disguise it. So little elements like that.
Joe, can I just interrupt? Sorry, everybody, to say we've got about 5 minutes left. There aren't any questions at the moment. So if you're all okay with it, I'll just ask Joe and David to continue for a couple more minutes and finish their slideshow. Is that okay, Joe?
Yeah, should we just carry? So what time are we finishing?
Say in about 5 minutes.
The slide talk, and then if there is any questions, we can go there, or we'll just, if there's no questions, we'll just waffle some more. Quickly again, this is the Sèvres collection. They have a lot of pieces in there, these ornate, almost ridiculous objects. You know, these are vases, that's a bowl holder. Do you know, they're over ornate. There's a string spindle, which I made a version of. So it's kind of that kind of artifice. So I was taking these shapes and sort of mashing them into this Dovian world. So using the fabrics, but using this kind of waxy, unpleasant surfaces, you know, no high glazes, no refinement, but still the basic shape of some of these things, and covering them. I had some mentoring as part of the funding with Duncan Hewson, who's a fantastic ceramicist. And he taught me, or told me about this process called terra sigillata, which is a really ancient method of glazing that the Romans used, where you defocculate the clay. So I learned really chemically how to defocculate clay, so I could separate the layers of clay. Then you kind of siphon out a kind of middle layer, so you have these really fine particles, which you then make into a glaze. So you're not using a glass glaze like you would on, you know, traditional ceramics. It's a kind of matte clay glaze, which was a process I fell in love with, and it chimed with everything in the exhibition. We'll talk about this one quickly, David. This is kind of reflected from, there's a really small display of objects associated with Charles I and his execution. You know, this is the pearl earring he wore when he was executed. There's a gold toothpick, there's coins he had in his pocket, and it's such a beautiful, private, sad, intimate little collection, you know, low lit, dark, somber, and obviously goes with everything. But, you know, we both really loved that collection, didn't we?
Yeah, the story behind some of those objects are incredible. the toothpick that was, I want to say guard, but Charles I, when he was in prison, there was a guard that looked after him, I think, and I think he gave this golden toothpick with a little golden kind of holder, toothpick holder, and he gave that to the guard before he was executed. And I think there was the rumours that, like, when he was executed, people rushed to this dead body to kind of claim all these objects. But I think there's a lot of mythology around all that. But it was such an amazing display. I don't think either of us have an image of it, but you can see the pearl earring there, and you can see the gold toothpick on images on the internet.
These bits of gold came again into the collection, into the the world, and I made these black pulvermite pearls through rubbing. They became the sorrowing pearls from the pearl earring, from the sorrow, which goes in the sorrowing purse. Perfectly logical. The whole thing is logical, and I'm going to be putting more on my Instagram of the labelling and the stories, and on my website, so you'll be able to see more of that. But so it's those profound moments, and I think it's those things when you view a collection where you're kind of really, really moved, and it's a assemblage of information, thoughts, and you come out with these kind of emotive feelings, but not quite sure why. And I think it's that.
I think this is my favourite detail, Jo.
Yeah.
Just because it was so bonkers.
And I got really obsessed with it.
You got really obsessed with it, but then there's this kind of Dovia logic. There's no, it makes sense in some odd way, and it kind of going back to the pearl. I mean, the images before of the pearls, and then now you've got these, those sorrowing pearls, and now you've got this small spherical object.
Yeah, well, I'll just quickly
it was a
explain
cannonball.
That's Atlas that's in the collection. I can't remember, is it from 1640? Need to find my notes. But it's an Atlas. And it's kind of Scandinavia, northern European places. So, and this, I believe, is just a cannon. It's a ball coming out of a cannon, but I turned it into this whole mythology in Dovia of the hovering ball, mesmerism, magic tricks, and it's a religion, but also it becomes a void. It's just perfect. And again, it's me inventing, but it just, so I could make hovering ball objects forever now, because it's just an amazing magical thing.
Jo, we've got a question from somebody. I just wondered if you could talk a bit about it before we end up, which is if you could talk a little bit about painted reflected light within the painting, the framing and the object, because it is quite particular in these works.
Reflected light. So there's reflection in water, which I always use for depth, and I feel like it pulls things, and it shows, it's kind of like these notions of something beneath and the surface reflected, but it's kind of the depth and the lack of ground and safety, but then there's the light reflected on that. The paintings always have light behind them that comes through. When I paint on copper or when I paint on canvas, there's a painted ground where light shows through. Everything was about reflection in this, the fabrics in the framing, where there's a little lip, it's about that light hitting the fabric and reflecting and changing the colour. The glint of frames, these silken fabrics, that hold the ceramics that the light hits. And I think I like to use like some of the fabrics here, so, really dull, olivey, browny fabric, but then hit by light becomes magical. When you get these olives coming up, these beautiful colours. And I find that in painting, my paintings can be quite dark and sometimes dreary, greys and khakis, brown colours, but then it's that illumination where light comes, when you're walking in a landscape yourself or anywhere, light makes everything magical. And I think that's where my paintings and my objects can be dark and sombre in intention. There's always that light, I think, somewhere.
Can I just say something? In the same way Jo had the privilege of kind of getting behind the scenes at the Welbeck estate, I also get the privilege of seeing behind the scenes of Jo Whittle, and which
it's not great,
which is it's a fascinating process when Jo paints, because the narrative or the journey a painting takes will have its highs and lows, and sometimes she'll just message me and say, I've ruined it, and then 2 days or an afternoon later on that afternoon she would have slightly recovered it. And I don't know how. I mean, I find that really, really interesting. I don't know if Jo ever thinks about how that might be interesting to others as well, or if she much prefers people to just see the final image and accept it for what it is. But there is an incredible journey, starting at the ground, ground layers
Ground
that you
zero.
put down and things. Yeah, ground zero. Yeah, so. I just thought I'd share that because the light comes and goes. It's almost like a photographer is arranging the lighting on objects, and and it doesn't work, so they move the lights, and then new colors come out and new shadows emerge. So it's not just you don't just paint it and it happens. There's a lot of it's a real journey.
Well, I do like the drama as well. So there is always a light beneath this glow movement, but then I love these flickers of light at the end. That's the real drama, where I stick a highlight on a tree or a tiny bit of thing that I just find really exciting. Just a tiny little fleck of paint, and sometimes a really kind of strange neon color, really painterly but tiny, that I really love to do. Yeah, it really works.
Okay, I think, Jo, David, we've now done 35 minutes. So I think we might have to wrap this up. You've both been brilliant, and certainly I hope that all of you listening have had at least a little bit of the sense of the complete joy it has been to work with Jo and her kind of crazy, chaotic imaginings about Dovia and cannonballs and black pearls. If you haven't seen the exhibition, please do come along, because, I mean, for me, living and working at Welbeck, it has been like seeing an old friend, but also completely revelatory. So thank you, Jo, and thank you, David. And thank all of you for coming along. Just to say that next month we'll be doing this again, and Jo will be back with us, and we will be talking about how we managed to judge the current Harley Open exhibition in lockdown and on Zoom. And we'll be talking, each of us, about some of the particular paintings and drawings which caught our eyes.
Lisa, may I just ask, are you getting visitor responses?
We are, unfortunately, we're not allowed to have our visitor comments book out at the moment because of COVID restrictions, but visitors who do come to the gallery are having an absolutely lovely time.
Yes, I can see how they'd want to have conversations or have a little video of Jo talking with David. I mean, I loved the exhibition and I want to come again. It's just so evocative of spirit of place transformed. Wonderful.
Okay, thanks.
I think I will just say, actually, when I have been there, or people have asked me questions when I've been there, oh, but where did that come from? People do believe in the objects as authentic objects that I have assembled them. There's moments, and I think that's how I did the labelling as well, that it's a real world. So I think a lot of people say they are really tricked, whatever the right word is, by that world, that it genuinely exists. So that's great. It means we won, David.
We did it. We hoodwinked.
I think we will try and find a way of getting this recording up in the exhibition, and certainly we'll make it available online as well.
Yeah, that's terrific. And I'd like to say thank you to the Arts Council for funding me to do this and help me with that. But thanks so much for inviting me to do this. It's been such a pleasure, and through such a difficult time as well. It was like being in a different world. And
yeah.
It's really amazing.
Thank you, Jo. Thank you, Lisa.
Yeah. Everybody, please, hope you'll join us this time next month. Bye.
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 Bye.